Hi everyone, this is the second last lecture of the semester, and here I am going to be talking about reporting results in both oral presentations and in written formats. So it is covered in your chapter 17 of the textbook if you would like further details. So in terms of this week's lecture, we'll be talking about reporting evidence and finding solutions, and then I'm going to talk about written reports in terms of their structure, and a few notes about oral presentations will be interspersed in terms of providing you with some examples, and I have provided you with an additional video on Wattle in terms of how to prepare for an oral presentation. So this week's lecture is brought to you by Learning Outcomes 6 and 7, which relates to finding solutions to the marketing problem and integrating that relevant evidence. And the last of our research outcomes, which is to produce an evidence-based marketing research report to maximize the likelihood of effective implementation of solutions. So here we're really dealing with a lot of the qualitative differences between good and bad presentation. So people can do fabulous analysis of both qualitative and quantitative information, but unless that information is presented in a way that is legible, understandable to an audience which may not be familiar with the analysis techniques used, often its effectiveness in reporting is lost. Sorry about that. So here we are dealing with how to show what you have done in a way that others can understand. So there is differences between reporting the evidence between quantitative and qualitative. So quantitative requires measurement and counting. We've talked about these numerous times over the semesters. But the questions are all the required contents present, and have any additional contents been included? So this might also include any qualitative follow-up questions, or whether this content is of value. So in terms of qualitative differences, this involves value judgments and emotional responses. So here the questions are: how well is the content done? How well is it presented? How legible is it? How engaging is it? Which leads into the last question of how compelling is the content? And the final thing I'm going to talk about in today's lecture is this idea of credibility and believability. So a compelling report or a compelling presentation of research is one that we consider to be both credible in how the research was conducted, and also believable in terms of how well that research was argued, and how we trust the reporters to have done their jobs correctly and the data to be presented effectively. So reporting quantitative information. So these are some examples that I have drawn from the internet. The full example is going to be made available on Wattle, but reporting quantitative information often requires you summarizing multiple tests and visually representing detailed information. For example, in terms of summarizing multiple tests, this is an example that is drawn from the presentation I have put onto Wattle, where you can see that they have conducted an experiment. Each one of these color-coded things refers to a different type of experiment or a different product category. We have an experimental period versus a control period. You have the experiment versus the control in terms of the test, and the significance reported of those tests on how, this was a test for difference. This is a summary of a test for difference. So you have multiple tests for difference conducted, and all of those tests reported in the one table. rather than having 20 odd different tables to report different tests for difference for the different experiments that were run. They have summarized everything into one table. Other ways of reporting quantitative information is these charts. So SPSS and Excel are better at reporting charts than PSPP, but PSPP can provide graph options. So in this case you see a pie diagram of the substitutes for Snickers under the two different experimental conditions, and here we also have a bar chart displaying the substitutes for Snickers under the detailing the differences between the normal sales, whether people substituted or whether people walked away when the Snickers was not available. So that is quantitative, as you basically taking large amounts of numbers and then presenting them in a way that summarizes and those numbers, but also makes it visually interesting to interpret those numbers. So qualitative data or qualitative reporting, on the other hand, often involves summarizing concepts and theories, and we are visually representing detailed information and often lots and lots of words in a way that makes it easy for the reader to be able to pick out what are the important ideas or the important words. So I'm going to talk about a presentation that I gave because my research tends to be more qualitative, so I have lots of examples of this where I have less of quantitative. So here is an example, the full one will go on to Wattle, of me developing a theory or conceptual framework around celebrity consumption. So here I'm saying that the celebrity comes in two forms. The celebrity can be an object or the image, or the celebrity can be a person or a subject. But also celebrity consumption takes two forms in the fact that it can be physical, something that is materialized in the real world, or it is something that is imagined, something that happens in our fantasies or in our heads. So conceptually I then say, developing my theory further, saying that reading, characterizing, parasocialization are a developing, they have relationships to each other where we see one image, then we characterize the celebrity as a type of person, and in parasocializing then we build a relationship with that person. Whereas encountering is a process of comparison. Basically we compare our readings, characterizations and our parasocial relationships with the real celebrity in real life that we might encounter. So presenting my evidence for this framework, I then provide quotes. So for reading a celebrity, I give my example of Kim Kardashian. I found this photo by doing a Google image search of celebrity, and this is the first image that appeared. So reading is the understandings of how to read and read into a particular celebrity, and the quote I've provided is from Alexander, who's 34 years old, who says that reading about it for the first time, then this image wouldn't add a lot, but it's a death by 1,000 cuts. So this idea of reading a celebrity is that sort of first instance of encountering an image, and you don't get an awful lot from one image, but you start to build a character of who this, or a feeling towards this celebrity as you encounter more images, which leads us into characterizing, where you have these multiple images of Kim Kardashian constantly being bombarded with images of Kim Kardashians. So therefore you then start characterizing who Kim Kardashian is. So this is the imagining who the celebrity is based on their public persona, using the object, images or roles that they inhabit. So this is a quote from Diana, who's 34 as well. She's talking about Jennifer Aniston. So poor Jen, but that's how she's portrayed in the media. I guess her friend's role, as well as a little bit like, you know, unlucky in love, So maybe she hasn't done herself a lot of credit by picking perhaps the wrong roles, and people then building into this idea of poor Jen. Then we have parasocializing, which is having an imagined relationship with the celebrity. So this is imagining the celebrity as an intersubjective relational other. So this is Rachel, 36. She's talking about Kate Middleton. So you feel like you have this personal relationship. Not a deep personal relationship, but some sort of friendship. So here she's not talking about Kate Middleton as a type of person or poor Kate Middleton. She's talking about the fact that she has a friendship with Kate Middleton. And finally, I have encountering, where you actually meet the celebrity as a real person. So this is displayed in my example images to the side, where I'm meeting Kim Kardashian and I don't know what to do. So in the quote, I'm talking to Penelope, who's 39 years old, and whose brother was the Clio Bachelor of the Year and a minor media celebrity, according to her. And she describes what it's like to know him both as her brother, because I actually know him and all of his foibles. You see his media presence, but then you know that real person behind it. So this idea that she has to keep both versions of her brother, the media celebrity, and him as her brother in her head at the same time. So the point of me showing you these slides was not to promote my research, but to demonstrate this idea of building a conceptual model and then using quotes. And in this case, I've used underlines. Some people use bolding various sections in order to illustrate the important bits from those quotes in presenting qualitative data. The other thing that you should be aware of is if you are quoting someone, oops, that's not what I needed to do. You should always, I've used pseudonyms, so I've given my respondents fake names. So Penelope's name is not really Penelope, but you will always, and the client will only ever know them by their fake names. I provided an age for them, but I could also say what gender they were, if it's relevant, what employment they have. So these sorts of descriptives of who the respondent is to give the reader some sense of who is talking. So this is presenting your data or presenting your findings. After you've done that, you need to develop solutions. You need to be able to recommend to the client what they should do as based on what you have found in terms of answering their research questions. So from these answers, what should happen next? So this is going to require you to critically think about the cause and effects between solutions to the research questions or answers to the research questions, and recommending the next step of what should happen in order to solve the ultimate research problem or the marketing problem that the client had. This may require you to do more literature to substantiate your claims and your recommendations, but you definitely do need to use your results to substantiate your recommendations. And once you've made a recommendation, you need to develop it further by considering how is it going to be implemented and some of the intended versus unintended consequences that might arise from any form of intervention into the client's marketing program. All right, so in terms of what you are required to do in terms of the content overall. So every report is unique. So I have provided you with an overall framework, a template that a colleague of mine in the US provided with me. However, that was developed for her research project. It might not necessarily be the best format in terms of your particular research project. So the overall format though is that you have a title page, a table of contents, an executive summary, research issues and objectives, the methodology, results, conclusions, recommendations, limitations, and appendices. So there's not a huge amount of variation in terms of the order in which these key things appear. However, where you present your qualitative findings versus your quantitative findings might differ depending on your specific methodology. For example, in most of our projects we have done qualitative first and then quantitative. So therefore, the qualitative data may be presented first or as part of the methodology if it was used to develop the quantitative instrument. However, in some research designs, the quantitative might come first and then the qualitative, and in those cases you might be presenting your quant versus qual findings only in the results section. So there is some leeway about what will appear where, but the overall structure tends to stay the same as what's presented here. So the title page and table of contents. So the title page is the first thing that the client will see. It should be professional, but it can also be creative. There are certain things that it must include, so the name of the research company. The research company in this case is your group name. I've given you a group name, but you can elaborate on that and create your own brand names for your group names if you'd like. The personnel in your groups, under ANU rules, you shouldn't provide names on the title page. I leave that to your discretion, but if you can at least include your student IDs, that is very helpful, because it tells us who exactly contributed to this report. You should include the name of the client, and you should all know that by now. The details of the submitting organisation, as in which subject you are in, the course code, those sorts of things, the date in which it was submitted, and some statement about the confidentiality agreement that you have signed in the contract. We also want a table of contents, so what are the specific topics and subtopics. So while the overall topic should appear as shown here, except that you do not list the title page and table of contents in a table of contents, the subheadings of, for instance, if you're going to cover your qualitative results in the methodology, that should be included in the sub-topics list in your table of contents. A list of tables and a list of figures and exhibits should also be provided. So the executive summary can be between 1 to 2 pages long. Usually it's between 1 and 1.5, depending on the detail and the length of the overall report. It's not included in your word count, so you can, the difference between 1 and 2 pages will not affect your word count for the report. So it's considered the most important part of the report because in most business contexts, it's the only thing read in a report. So this needs to be clear, concise, and contain all critical information for the client in order to understand what has happened and what they should do. So the key content areas are the background, the research questions and objectives, concise statement of research methods, summary of the main results, and conclusions and recommendations. The research issues and objectives, so this is the introduction, the background to the organisation and the problem, so the SWOT analysis, the findings from the situational analysis, using your secondary data, hypothesis and theoretical frameworks that you might be using. So these are covered in your research issues and objectives section that really sets up who you are doing the report for, what their situation is, what the problem is, and why this is important, and what kind of framework you're going to use in order to address the problem that the client has. So the methods section is to communicate how the research was conducted. So research design includes exploratory designs, descriptive designs, causal designs, theoretical designs, or a combination of these things. It also includes the types of data used or the types of evidence used. So secondary, qualitative, quantitative. If it's using qualitative, what was the method for conducting the qualitative research in terms of collecting the data and analysing the data? If it's the quantitative, what was the method used in terms of collecting and analysing the data? In terms of the structure, when talking about the qualitative, you need to talk about qualitative by itself in terms of why was it done, how was it done, who was sampled, what kind of questions were asked, and how was it analysed. Then go on and do the quantitative. Why is quantitative done? What kind of quantitative was done? Who was sampled? How the data was collected? How it was analysed. So keep those two things separate when it comes to your method section. And the summary of data. So I've talked about that bit, sorry. In the results section, this focuses on data analysis and findings. So this is the challenge for you is for each research question, you need to demonstrate your analysis that you used and what you found to address each research question so you can develop an answer to that research question. So we have to have results corresponding to each research objective and corresponding charts and tables with comments that go along with those research questions. So the research questions or your research objectives frame the results section. It is not framed by the type of analysis. It is framed by the question being addressed. Results continued. So they should be detailed in their presentation. They should be supporting tables, figures, and graphs. I have provided you with the guidelines that the APA, the American Psychological Association, or Psychology Association, anyway, not sure, provide in terms of reporting statistics and using tables and other figures to demonstrate analysis. So results need to be logical and supported using research questions or objectives. The technical information that the reader might have trouble understanding is better in the appendix, and only the key areas of the analysis needs to be included in the report. For example, if you need to run 20 t-tests, include the tables for those 20 t-tests in an appendix. Summarize the results from your 20 t-tests in the actual results section. So best practice suggests that visual representations are better than lots of words, and graphs and tables should provide the simple summary of data that is clear, concise, and non-technical, because the client may not have ever studied statistics, so it should not be too difficult for someone who has never studied statistics to understand what is going on in a statistical analysis. So conclusions are descriptive statements which generalize and summarize the results. For instance, based on our analysis of this data using these techniques, we found that X is most influential in a person's decision to purchase Y. That is a conclusion statement. So each conclusion should directly reference a research objective or a research question. For example, the example comes from your textbook, in terms of the kinds of concluding statements that you are required to generate. Recommendations. These require some critical thinking. must address how the client can resolve the problem at hand, and there must be this evaluation of how each conclusion is used to develop a specific area of application. So there needs to be a recommendation for each conclusion. And these applications need to develop strategic or tactical actions. So should price be increased or decreased? Should advertisements appear in TV or newspapers? So these kinds of specific actions or strategies for implementation for the client. So limitations. Limitations are not used to diminish the credibility of the reports, but basically they prove to the client that you understand the boundaries in which your research has taken place. For instance, a good limitation is that when doing the qualitative research, we only interviewed male respondents. While the research question did not specify that we only addressed male respondents, our qualitative research failed to take into account the female perspective. However, we addressed this in the quantitative. A bad limitation is saying that in the qualitative research, the interview questions were not standardized. That is a bad limitation in the fact that one of the major benefits of doing qualitative interviews is the ability to ask non-standardized questions, to ask questions out of order, to ask probing questions, to ask additional questions that you weren't aware that you might needed to ask before you started. So by mentioning a actual benefit of a method as a limitation of that method, you are demonstrating you have fundamentally misunderstood both the method and its application and its analysis. So avoid doing that at all costs. Make sure your limitations are actual limitations based on what you did and not a misunderstanding of what the benefit or disadvantages of a particular method might be. So the key content areas here are sampling limitations. So the fact that we don't have huge databases of potential customers or potential respondents means that most of our projects tend to be convenience or non-probabilistic in their sampling techniques. That's a limitation of our sampling approach based on the fact that we don't have the resources to do a probabilistic sampling approach. Data collection limitations. If we are using convenience techniques, it means that our data collection is limited to people that we have contact with. Time or money constraints. The fact that we only had a few weeks to collect data and we had no financial resources in order to access customer databases or respondent databases. Any problems with quality, non-respondent biases, missing data biases, all of these are problems with the quality of the data or possibly the quality of the final results and analysis. Measurement or analysis concerns. So the idea that things like loyalty are difficult to measure exactly, so we tend to use proxy measures of future purchase intentions or current purchase behavior as a measurement of loyalty, because it's quite difficult to measure people's actual purchase behavior to demonstrate that they are loyal or not. And the final section is your appendices. So these are the extra bits that are important in terms of providing additional information to support your contentions within the report, but are not actually critical to the story that you are telling in the report. So it's treated as a point of reference, so you might want to say in the report, we conducted XYZ test with the, full, and then in brackets, full statistical analysis is located in Appendix B, for example. So in terms of appendices, some of the key contents are any complex or detailed information, particularly when it comes to the statistics, the research brief, the questionnaire, the interview guide, or the questionnaire, supplementary materials, detailed statistical analysis and tables. So the reason we do all of this in terms of having these elaborate appendices and always using our evidence, qualitative and quantitative, to support our findings and our conclusions and our recommendations, is that a better report is a more credible and a more believable report. So this is related to accuracy and professionalism in its organisation. So is it following the standard report format? Is it presenting all of the required information? So it doesn't tolerate carelessness in handling data. So the fact that we did respondent checking and data entry checks should all be reported. In reporting statistics, report all the stages of the analysis, what transformations, what recoding, all of those sorts of things should be reported. So errors in mathematical calculations, grammatical errors, and incorrect terminology are examples of these inaccuracies. So avoid at all costs. If English is not your first language, or you know you are a terrible grammarian, get your report checked by others. Have someone read it who is not in marketing, who may not be in business at all, and say, can you read this? Can you understand what's going on? Because that might be indicate whether what you have said makes sense to someone who has a similar background to the client. And report believability. The quality of a report that is based on the clear and logical thinking, using precise expression and seamless presentation. The easiest way to present this or create this believability is to have this consistent narrative or this story that you are telling from the beginning to the end of the report. Is this story consistent? Can we see the flow of ideas from one section of the report to the other? And when do we get to the end of the report, can we clearly say, yes, we have answered this marketing problem that you argued existed at the beginning of the report. So if people don't understand what they are reading, why they are reading it, they don't believe what they have read. So make sure that it is understandable in the first instance, and then deal with precision and this seamless narrative in the second instance. So, good luck. That is all I needed to cover with you this week. I have provided additional materials on Wattle when it comes to preparing presentations and reports and reporting on statistics. When it comes to your presentation content versus your report content, they are the same in terms of the basics that need to be covered in a presentation are the same basics that need to be covered in a report. How that content is presented and the mode in which that is presented, is what is different between the two. In a written report, you can show a lot more detail when it comes to numbers and statistics, whereas in a visual presentation, it should be much more visual in its demonstration of those statistics. So, again, good luck, and we are nearly at the end.